Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's something that can happen in both children and adults, although most of the time we associate it with children. And it's very, very difficult to diagnose. And it's often confused when we see children that are energetic and active. But what is shocking is 13% of men will be diagnosed with ADHD in their lifetime, and it's 3 times more than women. Today, we're speaking with Sonal Singh. She's an ADHD executive function, career, and life transition coach. She is India's first certified ADHD coach and educational therapist. She works with both adults and children, parents, and of course, strengthening executive function skills, emotional regulation, and social skills. Welcome, Sonal. We're excited to have you here and learn about what is ADHD because it is often so confusing.
Thank you, Sukirti. I'm so happy to be here and to talk about this very important subject that now is gaining more and more attention, especially since the pandemic has started.
So tell us, what is it? Because, we are confused.
Yeah, so ADHD is attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And technically, what that means is that there is a struggle for many people who struggle with ADHD on managing their attention, their focus. They tend to get distracted a lot. They tend to be impulsive. Increasingly, there's also a good understanding that ADHD entails that there is a challenge in regulating not only attention, but also emotions and also your energy. So it's a regulation disorder versus anything else. And all of this has an impact on your executive function skills, which are your ability to plan, prioritize, manage time, visualize time, estimate time, to start a task, to complete the task. And of course, on how well are you able to take changes in your stride. So all these different things are part of ADHD.
So typically we associate ADHD with children, and a lot of times we're talking about that. But how young is it? Because children seem to be very active, and it's very hard to keep them focused on anything for a long time. So how do we know what's normal and what is possibly something that requires attention?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. So increasingly, there are a lot of young, kids that parents feel have ADHD, and as young as maybe, 2 years old or 2.5 years old. But I always caution towards not making that judgment so early, because kids who are younger tend to be very active, tend to be on their feet a lot, especially right now when everybody is indoors. So it tends to be just a much more accentuated experience for everyone. Typically, when you look at a diagnosis for ADHD, so I don't diagnose, and for a diagnosis, you have to go to a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist. They will tell you that many of these symptoms need to be there with a child for at least 6 months or more. And the symptoms include fidgeting, there is hyperactivity as though they are always on a move. There is this distraction, they can't really focus on many things that are not of their interest. On the other hand, you will find there's also a lot of hyper focus on things that they are highly interested in. So, many times parents will complain, my child can sit and be on a video game or on a set of Legos for hours. But if I ask my child to sit and do homework or reading, they just won't do it, right? So it depends on the child's interest. So that hyper focus is an alternate side or a different side to the inattention. And of course, the inability many times to manage their emotions. So you will see a child that is quick to, anger, and then is finding it hard to regulate that emotion. So all of those signs, when you see them happening at a very high frequency and at a very high intensity, you want to talk to your pediatrician and subsequently, if needed, to a clinical psychologist to see if an assessment is needed. But typically, children are assessed only after the age of 6 years for ADHD. Anything younger than that is, hard, I feel, to diagnose.
Now, we're often also confused between ADD and ADHD. Are they the same thing? Are they different? And now that you also brought it up, what is the difference between what you do and what a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist does?
Wonderful. Great question. So, the difference between ADHD and ADD really is nothing anymore.
Okay.
So, ADD is pretty much now a part of ADHD, and ADHD is basically identified as three different types. So, there's ADHD hyperactive, there's ADHD inattentive, and there is ADHD combined, which is a combination of hyperactivity as well as inattentive. ADD is no longer really a term that is being used in the ADHD world, so to speak. It's now ADHD inattentive is how you would describe it. So that is the first thing. The second thing is now what a psychiatrist does is they do diagnostics, they do assessments, and then they actually prescribe medication as per what you need according to the your diagnosis, right? So that is what a psychiatrist does. A clinical psychologist can also do the assessment, and they also provide you a lot of therapeutic support, but they are not the ones who will always give you medication. For medication, many times they are going to actually refer you to a psychiatrist. What I do is, and one other thing, what a clinical psychologist will also do is they will actually provide, like I said, therapeutic support for ADHD many times. So they will, and anxiety which comes with ADHD. So they are going to look at CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. They're going to look at other sorts of therapies to support you in understanding your ADHD better, and will also provide you certain suggestions on how you move past the challenges that you have. How do you find your coping skills? What I do as an ADHD coach is that I help you understand very clearly.
When you say help you, you're talking about the child.
I'm talking about the child, I'm talking about the parent, because if I do not work with children under the age of 12. In that case, it's much more important to actually work with parents to help them understand what is getting in the child's way and how to support the child in making sure that they are able to learn the skills that they need to navigate all aspects of their life, whether it is in their academic sphere or it is in their personal sphere. And then, of course, I work with adults directly. Now, what also another reason why I work with parents is because my interaction with the child will be once or twice in a week, whereas a parent is actually available to the child all the time, or at least a lot more than me. And if they have that understanding at a granular level as to how to support the child, then they are able to make sure that the learning or the change that comes is much more long term, not only for the child, but also in the way that their parenting has to shift. And that is a very important aspect of coping with ADHD for children, right? Because how the parenting is actually done with these kids needs to be a little bit nuanced.
I know most parents, I think we're always a little bit frazzled if it comes to medication. So, can ADHD be managed without medication? Because when you see all these TV shows, the first thing is, it's a box of pills.
Yeah, so absolutely. Again, I don't actually talk that much of medication because that is, again, the psychiatrist's sphere. But there is enough evidence out there to say that medication does work for the people that it works for. And then there are others that it doesn't work for. But here is my thought on medication. Like we need eyeglasses if our eyesight is poor, and if the child needs medication to support them on ADHD, it's exactly the same phenomena. You will never deprive a child of eyeglasses if their eyesight is weak. So if a child needs medication to manage certain chemical imbalances, then that is something to consider very seriously. Do you need to support them? And of course, there are many other alternate therapies. And actually, managing ADHD is not just the medication. There are many other aspects to it, which include sleep, which include nutrition, which includes exercise, alternate therapies like making sure certain vitamins are present, certain other supplements are given. So there is all of this. And then, of course, that supported in a big way with structure, with routine, with nurturing presence of the adults in the child's life that can shift everything for the child.
And any myths that we should be concerned about? Because, like I said, I mean, I hear it from so many parents. I think my kid has ADHD, my kid doesn't pay attention, my kid can't sit for long. Are there some myths that we should be aware of?
There are two, and one which is very close to my heart, which is that there is this perception that it's boys who tend to have ADHD and girls don't. But actually, girls also tend to have ADHD. They're just not diagnosed because many girls tend to show signs that are very different, that are aligned to what we see as a model child. So the child is not, running around, is not hyperactively jumping on the sofa. So we see boys and then we are like, okay, this kid has ADHD, or, my child is really hyperactive. Girls many times don't do that. But what girls do is they have a lot of inattention, they have a lot of distraction, they might show a lot of signs of anxiety, which many times is, ADHD in girls is many times misconstrued as anxiety or as depression. So that is the one thing that I would firstly like to caution parents, that when you think of ADHD, don't think that it is something that is majorly prevalent in boys. Also think about your girls who are not really able to do things as easily as they would like to, or as easily as many of their classmates, when it comes to paying attention in class, getting work done, getting started on things, completing their work, because they might be struggling with ADHD, which is just going unnoticed or missed. Um, the second thing is, especially like I said, during the pandemic, there has been a big sort of, everybody is talking about the fact that we are seeing a lot of ADHD traits in my child, and a lot of calls I get from parents that I know my child has ADHD. I can see it because my child can't pay attention. And one reason for that is that we are all going through this difficult time where we are mostly situated at home, and we've gotten into a pattern which is, in some ways, you would just say we are stuck in a rut, right? And children are stuck in a rut, and children are going through a difficult time as well. So make sure that your children are actually getting a proper structure at home, a proper routine at home, and there is a lot of time for fun. If the child is having fun, it allows the child's brain to rejuvenate, to relax, to really be able to then focus on the things that the child finds harder to do. But if the child is not getting that fun, to so to speak, then imagine when we are feeling tired and exhausted, we can't really concentrate on things, right? And it's exactly the same thing with children. If you do notice something that has been going on for a long time, even previous to the pandemic, where you felt that the child was not able to concentrate, the child had trouble starting tasks and completing tasks, or having struggle planning and prioritizing, then yes, definitely go ahead and consider speaking to your child specialist, your pediatrician, or a child psychologist.
Well, thank you, Sonal. I think that will help a lot of us and calm us down.
Yes, I'm so glad to hear that.
Now, switching gears, Sonal, let's talk about adults and ADHD. Now, when we think about adults and ADHD, is it something that was not missed as a child, or is it something that actually can also happen to adults?
Fantastic questions, Sukirti. So the the broad understanding here is that mostly people who get diagnosed as adults with ADHD are those whose diagnosis was missed when they were younger, when they were kids. And many times what happens is, when you are an achiever, or even if you're not a overachiever, which many people are, like high achievers, but even if you are an achiever, you're able to get through school, you're able to get through your college career, you're able to work, all of that is happening. There is, at least in India, a very strong resistance to actually diagnose people with ADHD. And I hear that from all my adult clients, that no, my doctor has said, well, if I was able to, get through college and I went into IIT, for example, then
Yeah,
how could I have
after I have.
And then it's only when they got into their, let's say, PhD programs, or they started working, or they got married and were managing work, is when things really started falling apart. And when they went back to the doctors, it was clearly an ADHD diagnosis. So many times that's what occurs, that it's much later in life that they get diagnosed with ADHD, because when they were younger, they found either the coping skills to manage it, or many times, especially in the case of girls, but even in the case of boys, it was misdiagnosed as anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder.
Now, the question always comes up, is it too late if you, or can it be rectified at any age?
Yeah, so it's never too late. It's always good to know that you this is the diagnosis you have. And it's not about labeling, because some people are very concerned, do I really want a label? It's not at all about labeling. It's just about knowing this is what I'm dealing with, and what are the steps now that I need to take to actually address this. So it's not that you ever, like there's no magic pill to do away with ADHD. There isn't. But so even when you take medication, the medication helps you manage maybe your focus or your impulsivity, but you still need to learn the skills that are actually going to help you manage through life, right? And many times as we grow older, we do learn certain coping skills. Like, supposing I struggle with time management, I will have many times people around me who will keep me on track, right? So you develop these coping strategies as you grow older, but then there are still other things that you struggle with. And always I hear this from my clients. It's like swimming against the tide. You're always struggling. What comes much easier to others doesn't come so easy to you. So when you get diagnosed later in life, it's all right to then start seeking support, whether it is for emotional regulation, whether it's for executive function skills, whatever it might be. And many times for adults, it goes a lot deeper. There might be issues around managing boundaries. When I say boundaries, it is like, how do I manage my own time? Do I always say yes to others, even if I am not really able to manage that commitment, or prioritize what I need for myself or my family? So what are my needs? Am I serving my needs? Is it always about others, right? So many times, or it could be vice versa, is it always about me versus managing space for others or holding space for others? So these are certain things that we want to address even as adults.
But even as adults right now, we all feel that we are have so many distractions. There's so many things. We feel that it's actually very difficult to focus. So how do you separate that and say, okay, here are the signs and symptoms that this could be ADHD? Because you get a ping here, you get an email there, you have a kid shouting here, so it feels like always you're running against, trying to focus and get things done.
It's so true, so true. And like I said, it's so much more difficult now that we are sitting at home and managing multiple responsibilities, right? Um, Again, if you have ADHD, the signs have been there for a long time, right? So if you're finding it hard now to struggle in the last 1.5 years, it's a little bit different than if you've had a difficulty paying attention and having that focus even earlier, but now it's become a lot worse, right? So as a individual, you'd be able to know the signs. But one very important thing that I would tell everyone is that when you are wondering, and we all are showing ADHD traits right now, so when you're wondering, is this something that really I need to seek support on, or help, or a further diagnosis on, take some time out and really notice what's going on in your life, right? So are you really focused, are you getting a lot of sort of input from your phone, for example? Are there times that you can actually create that separation between the technology and you? Are there times that you can, or can you bring certain sort of structure in your life which allows you to build a certain routine where you have good sleep, good nutrition? And then notice, how does that impact your ability to pay attention, to focus, to prioritize? So notice whether this is something that's temporary, or it is something that is been going on for a while before. So bringing those structures in place can really make a difference. And very importantly, self-care, which is something we as adults tend to ignore a lot, especially as women. We tend to not focus a lot towards what we need at the end of the day to take care of ourselves, to wind down. We are always on the go, right? So making sure that you take some time out for self-care and then take a call. Yes, this is something that's really going on and I want to address it.
Well, thank you, Sonal. I think that helps us a lot because, like I said, we are always like, especially women, we're doing 10 things at once.
And I want to say to that, Sukriti, that actually multitasking, we pride ourselves on being multitaskers, and there is some discussion and conversation out there in the world to say that multitasking is actually overrated. You need to start bringing mindfulness into your life in an active way. So really being present to what you're doing at that moment and letting other things be. And that is with everything. So whether if you decide that you want to be on your phone, being on social media, do it knowingly versus on autopilot, right? If you're having a cup of coffee and chatting with a friend, do it knowingly and enjoy that versus then feeling bad. Oh my gosh, I was to do all this other work and I didn't get it done because I got caught in a phone call, right? So bringing that mindfulness in and not multitasking is something that would really, again, address a lot of this.
Well, thank you, Sonal. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sukirti. This was such a lovely interaction and I really enjoyed this.